The mask was black silk, and it smelled faintly of cedar smoke, and Sarah Vane had exactly one night to be someone other than the Omega her pack had thrown away. That was the bargain of the Vale Run. Held once a year under the blood moon, when every wolf in the borderlands danced masked and nameless in the birch grove, and no one asked who you were or what you were worth. She danced with a tall stranger whose gloves were warm and whose voice was low, and when he hummed an old melody against her hair, something in her chest unlocked like a rusted gate. One night, one mask, one mistake, her old pack would have called it. 9 moons later, in a leaning stone dye house at the edge of the Black Pine territory, Sarah had twins, and on a cold evening in early autumn, a massive black wolf with a streak of white across his left shoulder came limping out of the pines toward her door. And here is what Sarah did not know and never could have guessed. That wolf was Caelan Draven, Alpha King of the Black Pine Range, sovereign of 11 packs, the most feared shifter on the continent, the same man who had hummed against her hair under the blood moon, the same man who had spent 9 moons tearing his kingdom apart, looking for a masked woman who smelled of lavender. He meant to stay one night. He was wrong. The dye house, set where the old trade road gave up and became mud. Sarah had patched the roof with river slate herself, and the whole place smelled of beeswax, dried yarrow, and the wet wool stink of the 3 orphaned lambs she was overwintering in the lean-to. She was a healer of animals, mostly, and of people when they were desperate enough to come to a cast-out Omega. That week, she had set a hawk's wing, stitched a plough horse, and lanced an abscess on a goat that had thanked her by eating her only good glove. She was hauling wash water when she saw him. A black wolf the size of a pony, standing at the tree line with one forepaw lifted, blood dark on the fur above the pad. Any sensible woman would have gone inside and barred the door. Sarah set down her bucket, crouched in the mud, and held out her hand. "Oh, you poor enormous thing," she said. "Who did that to you?" Inside the skull of the poor enormous thing, a king was having a crisis. I should leave, Caelan thought. The cut was nothing. A silver snare on the ridge, careless, barely a graze, though it burned like a coal under the skin. He had only followed the lavender. He had caught it on the wind 2 days ago, faint and impossible, threaded through the pine sap and wood smoke of the borderlands, and his wolf had simply stopped obeying him. 9 moons of search parties, of scent trackers, of interrogating every seamstress who had sewn a black silk mask, and in the end his own paws had walked him here without permission. She is coming closer, he thought. I am the Alpha King. I will nod with dignity and withdraw. She touched his ruff and scratched, firmly, just behind his left ear. His back leg thumped the mud 4 times before he could stop it. "We will never speak of that," he told his wolf. His wolf, smug and warm, did not answer. She got him inside. This should not have been possible, as he outweighed her 3 times over. But she did it the way she apparently did everything, by assuming his cooperation so completely that refusing felt rude. She cleaned silver burn with witch hazel that stung like an insult, packed it with honey and yarrow, and wrapped it while lecturing him about snares. Then she looked at the mud caked up all 4 of his legs and into his belly fur, sighed the sigh of a woman who has already lost the argument with herself, and dragged the big copper dye vat in front of the hearth. "You're not bleeding on my only blanket looking like that," she said. In, and that is how the Alpha King of the Black Pine Range came to be sitting chest-deep in warm water in a copper vat in a borderland shack, having lavender soap worked into his ears by an omega in a patched apron, while he stared at the fire with the fixed dignity of a monarch, pretending very hard to be somewhere else. "This is a tactical situation," he told himself, as her fingers dug into the tight muscle at the base of his neck, and his eyes began, treacherously, to close. "I am gathering intelligence." The intelligence bathing him began to hum while she scrubbed. Low, absent, the way people hum when their hands are busy. Every hair on his body stood up under the water. It was the melody. His melody. The old black pine cradle hymn that only the royal line was taught, that his mother had hummed to him, that he had hummed like a fool against a masked woman's hair under the blood moon, because for one night he had not wanted to be a king. Sarah hummed it wrong in 2 places, exactly the 2 places she would have hummed it wrong if she had only ever heard it once. In the dark, against her hair. "Found you," his wolf said, and it was not a triumphant sound. It was a sound like a key turning. Then from the wooden crate by the hearth that he had taken for a supply box, something sneezed. Kalen turned his head. The crate was lined with sheepskin, and in it, fists curled, lashes down, lay 2 sleeping infants, a boy and a girl, dark-haired, perhaps 2 moons old. The girl had kicked her wrapping loose, and Sarah reached over with wet, soapy hands and tucked it back without breaking her humming, the automatic motion of someone who had done it 400 times alone. The wind shifted through the gap under the door, and their scent reached him properly for the first time. Lavender, cedar smoke, and underneath, unmistakable as a signature, the iron and winter scent line of the House of Draven. His pups, his mate, his twins, sleeping in a crate in a shack with a patched roof, at the muddy edge of his own kingdom, while their mother rationed honey and hauled her own water and hummed his family's hymn to a stray wolf. The water in the vat went very still. Sarah glanced down and found the wolf staring at the crate with an expression she decided later she must have imagined, because wolves do not look like their entire world has just been rearranged. "Those are Rowan and Wren," she said. "Don't get any ideas. They're not snacks." He put his head on the rim of the vat, closed his eyes, and made his decision with the swiftness for which the Black Pine Crown was famous. "I was never ever leaving." He left the next morning, obviously, because kingdoms do not run themselves, but he came back that night, and the next. And this began the period that the palace record keepers would later refer to, very carefully, as His Majesty's autumn inspections of the border provinces. The first theft was the shawl. Sarah had one good shawl, grey wool with a moth hole she had darned in blue because blue thread was what she had. And one evening it vanished off the wash line. She found it 2 days later, returned to the line, mysteriously smelling of pine, with a fat dead rabbit hung neatly beside it like a payment. "Did you steal my shawl?" she asked the wolf that night, hands on hips. The wolf gazed at the middle distance with the serenity of the innocent. In the granite fortress 12 miles away, his beta, a scarred veteran named Torin, had asked a similar question that morning, specifically why the Alpha King's own bedding now smelled of lavender and lanolin, and had received the reply, delivered without eye contact, that the king was conducting a scent-masking exercise for security purposes, and that Torin was welcome to take it up with the War Council if he objected. The second theft went the other direction. Sarah opened her door one frost-white morning and found, sitting on the step, a brooch, heavy silver, wrought in the shape of a running wolf, with a moonstone the size of her thumbnail. She turned it over twice, went pale, and marched to the tree line where the black wolf was pretending to be asleep. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "This is worth more than this whole house. Did you take this off a body? Am I harboring a grave robber?" The wolf yawned. "I can't keep it. Someone will hang me for it." She tucked it into the rafters above the door anyway, wrapped in oilcloth, because winter was coming and her twins were small, and a woman alone learns not to throw away a rope while she's drowning. The wolf watched her hide his mother's brooch, the coronation brooch of the queens of black pine, between a roof beam and a bundle of dried tansy, and felt his chest do something complicated and warm. "It is a strategic asset placement," he informed himself. Nothing more. The third escalation was the twins. It happened by accident, in that Sarah was elbow-deep in a difficult lambing at a neighbor's croft, and the woman minding Rowan and Wren stepped out for firewood, and when Sarah came home at dusk, boots bloody, half dead on her feet, she found the enormous black wolf lying on his side by the hearth, with both her children asleep against his belly, and Wren's tiny fist gripping his ear like a handle. She stood in the doorway a long moment. "You," she said finally, voice cracking on the word, "are the strangest stray I have ever taken in." The wolf's tail rose and fell once against the floorboards, softly, so as not to wake them. After that, he minded them often. He learned that Rowan could be soothed by a low rumble in the chest, and that Wren could not be soothed by anything. She simply had opinions and required an audience for them. He learned that when Wren chewed his ear with her 4 ferocious teeth, his eyes flashed gold with the effort of adoring her, and he learned to keep his face turned to the wall when it happened, because the first time Sarah had frowned and said, "Huh, your eyes catch the light almost like." And then a lamb had knocked over the milk pail, and the sentence had drowned, and the king of black pine had lain there with his heart slamming like a portcullis. That was the first near disaster. The second was the storm. It came down off the ridge in the black of a November night, hail like flung gravel, and the wolf, who had a fortress with 4-foot granite walls 12 miles away, scratched at Sarah's door like an abandoned puppy. She let him in, swearing. Sometime after midnight, the roof patch over the crate began to drip, so she moved the twins into her own narrow bed against the wall, and sometime after that, a body. The temperature of a banked forge climbed up onto the foot of the bed, and by morning, Sarah woke with her back against a wall of black fur, both babies in the warm hollow between them, her cold toes shoved shamelessly under a haunch worth 11 kingdoms. The pup was cold, Kaelin explained to no one, staring at the ceiling. "Pups require regulated temperature. This is a duty of the crown." His wolf said nothing. His wolf had stopped arguing weeks ago. His wolf had won. The daylight visits were their own disaster. Because the Alpha King did officially tour the border provinces that autumn, riding through in black and silver with a retinue, and twice his route took him, by an astonishing coincidence that required rerouting 2 rivers of paperwork directly past a leaning stone dye house. The first time, Sarah came out to see the commotion with Wren on her hip, and the most powerful man on the continent looked down at her from horseback and completely forgot every word he had planned during 3 days of planning. "You keep livestock," is what he finally said, in the voice he used for sentencing traitors. "Yes, sire," Sarah said, wary, dipping her head. "That is." He stared at her. She smelled of lavender and bread. "Wren, from her hip, regarded him with his own gold-flecked eyes, and blew a spit bubble at the crown of black pine. "Adequate," the king concluded, and rode on, and Tauren, riding behind, developed a sudden cough that lasted a quarter-mile. That night the wolf appeared at her door, and Sarah sat down beside him on the step, with a cup of nettle tea, and said, "The Alpha King himself rode past today, looked at me like I was a badly built fence, and said my lambs were adequate." She snorted. "They say he's the coldest wolf in 100 years. I believe it. A man like that has never held anything soft in his life." The coldest wolf in 100 years, who at that moment had her wool socks drying on his back, chose dignity and stared at the moon. Winter came, and with it came the two things that would break everything open. The first was named Joss. The second was named the Frost Moon Council. Joss was a trapper, broad, cheerful, sandy-bearded, and he began finding reasons. A haunch of venison, too much for one man. A repaired hinge. He was kind, that was the worst of it. Kind and human-shaped and possible. And one evening he stood in Sarah's doorway, turning his hat in his hands, and said that a woman shouldn't winter alone out here, and that he had a sound cabin and no objection to another man's pups, none at all, and that she should think on it. Sarah thanked him gently, and did not say yes and did not say no, and from the tree line a black shape watched Joss walk away whistling, and every silver snare that man laid for the next month was found sprung, mangled, and in one memorable case, 12 feet up a tree. The human half of Kalen behaved worse. At the Frost Moon Council, when a border clerk mentioned in passing a trapper's petition from the western edge, the Alpha King, who had not been listening to anything for an hour, said, "Deny it," with such flat finality that 3 elders flinched, and then had to sit through his own council wondering aloud what the western trapper could possibly have done. He did not know. He did not care. His hands would not unclench. It was Elder Vessa who turned the wondering dangerous. Vessa was old iron, backbone of the castle for 40 years, and she had built her whole long life on one law, that the royal blood of Black Pine must never run loose and unclaimed, because unclaimed royal blood was how the succession wars of her girlhood had burned 4 packs to ash. She had watched her king all autumn. She had noted the rerouted tours, the lavender, the deny it. And Vessa had sent a quiet man west to look, and the quiet man had come back and said, "Twins," and said, "gold eyes." What no one at that table knew was that Vessa had once had a daughter, unmated, disgraced, dead in a border, winter 30 years gone, and the pup with her, and in the sleeve of Vessa's council robes. To this day, she carried a small carved rattle no bigger than a thumb, worn smooth by her own worrying hands. When the quiet man said twins, something under her old iron flinched, and she crushed it, because she had crushed it for 30 years, because law was the only thing that had ever held. "Unclaimed royal-blooded pups," she told the council, "are a blade lying in the road. Someone will pick them up." She meant it as law. Lord Maddock of the Eastern Range, listening from the 3rd chair with his long ambitions, heard it as instruction. Sarah knew none of this. What Sarah knew was that the nights were long, and the wolf was warm, and somewhere in the deep of that winter, she had started telling him things. It was easy. He listened with his whole body, ears turning to follow her voice, and he could not repeat a word of it. And so by the fire, with the twins asleep, and her mending in her lap, she told the wolf what she had never told a living soul. "I never learned his name," she said one night quietly. "The masked one? Their father." Her needle stopped. "Everyone thinks I was ruined. My old pack put my things out in the rain, and my own aunt wouldn't look at me at the boundary stone, and I let them all believe I regretted it, because it was easier." She looked into the fire. "I don't regret it. That's my worst secret." He held the back of my head like I was something that could break and something worth not breaking, both at once. And he hummed this melody. I still can't get it out of my bones. If he walked in that door tonight, I wouldn't even know his face. She laughed, small and cracked. "I'd know his hands. Isn't that stupid? I'd know that hum." The wolf lay very still. Inside him, the king was on his knees. "Tell her," said his wolf. "Shift now tonight. Tell her." And say what? Kaelin thought. That I sat in her bath. That I stole the shawl. That I have known for 3 moons that Rowan and Wren are mine, and I let her split one honey pot 4 ways while I ate her stew with a straight face. Every day I did not tell her built the wall a course higher. He looked at her, fire-lit, threading her needle, and thought, "Tomorrow. Tomorrow I come as a man, with the truth in my hands." I was still rehearsing it when Maddox's hunters came, 2 nights later, for the twins. There were 5 of them, professionals, and they came at moonset with wax on their boots and silvered net poles, and their orders. Maddox had been very clear on this one point, his single unbargainable point. "We're not a scratch on the pups. They are still my kin." They pried the lean-to first, and the lambs screamed, and Sarah came out the door with a lantern in one hand and a lambing knife in the other, and a net pole took the lantern out of her grip, and the dark came down, and she heard, inside her own house, Wren begin to cry. What happened next, the Borderlands talked about for a generation. The black wolf came out of the tree line, like the end of the world. He took the first hunter at the knees and the second at the shoulder. And he was not fighting the way animals fight. He was fighting like a siege. And Sarah, scrambling toward her door, saw a crossbow come up from the dark of the woodpile, aimed at her back, and saw the wolf see it too. I did not have the angle as a wolf, so he stopped being one. Between one stride and the next, the great black shape poured upward, and it was a man who took the silver bolt through the shoulder, a tall man who caught the crossbowman's skull in one hand and put him into the frozen ground, a man who then stood swaying in the moonset, with blood sheeting down his bare arm, between Sarah and everything in the world, and roared in a voice that 11 packs knelt to, "They are mine!" The remaining hunters fled. The night went very quiet, except for Wren, still crying inside, and the lambs and Sarah's own heartbeat. She raised the recovered lantern with a shaking hand. The light climbed him. The white streak of an old scar across the left shoulder, exactly where the wolf's white blaze had been. The gold eyes she had almost recognized a dozen times, the face off the coins. "Sire," she whispered. And then, because the pieces were still falling, and because her whole winter was rearranging itself behind her eyes, the bath, the bed, the socks, the secrets, "Oh, moon and stars, the secrets," she said in a voice like cracking ice. The shawl, Talon, bleeding, exhausted, exposed, closed his eyes. The shawl was me. The rabbit, an apology for the shawl. The brooch in my... scepters that I've been terrified to touch. My mother's, the coronation brooch of the Queens of Black Pine. He swallowed. It was not a theft. It was a proposal. I am aware you could not have known that. You slept in my... The pups were hod, said the Alpha King, with the ghost of his last defense, and watched it die in the air between them. Sarah went inside, picked up her daughter, hushed her against her shoulder, and came back to the doorway. And now her voice was not ice, it was fire, and it was worse. You knew, she said. How long have you known they were yours? He could have softened it. He owed her better. Since the first night, the bath, I scented the line. 3 moons. Her arm tightened around Wren. 3 moons, Kaelin Draven. I fed you my winter stores. I told you things I have never. I told you about you. And you lay there on my floor and let me. Her eyes were bright and terrible. I hauled water with your daughter on my back while you wore a crown 12 miles away. Bind your shoulder. There's yarrow on the shelf. You know exactly where. You've watched me use it often enough. And then get out. Sarah, out, she said. Both of you. The man and the wolf. I need to be angry, and I can't do it while you're bleeding in my dooryard looking like that. He went. That is the part the ballads always get wrong. They have him sweep her up that same night. But the truth is that the Alpha King of the Black Pine Range bound his own shoulder, posted 40 soldiers in a ring around a leaning dye house, and then sat down outside her door as a wolf in the snow and stayed. The first day she ignored him. The second day it sleeted, and she opened the door at midnight, said, "This changes nothing," and let him drip on the hearthstone. The third day she sat down on the floor in front of him, cross-legged, the way you get level with something you intend to have the truth from, and said, "Shift, I'm not talking to the ears. The ears are unfair, and you know it." So he shifted and wrapped himself in the blanket she threw at his head, and told her all. The veil run. 9 moons of searching, every seamstress, every scent trail gone cold. The hymn she hummed wrong in 2 places. The moment by the vat, when the wind came under the door, and his whole life walked into that crate and went to sleep. And the cowardice, he used the word himself, of every silent day after, because the wolf could be near her without deserving her, and the man could not. Sarah listened with her chin on her fist. When he finished, she was quiet a long moment. "You hid from me for 3 moons, she said. "So understand what I'm agreeing to. Look at me carefully here. I am not agreeing to a crown. I'm agreeing to a courtship, conducted by the man, on 2 legs, with his name attached." She held out her hand, palm up. "Start with the hands. I told you I'd know them." He put his hand in hers. She turned it over, ran her thumb across the palm, and Kaelin watched 9 moons of doubt leave her face all at once, and had to look at the fire. "There you are," she said softly. "You absolute thief." The Frost Moon Court convened 3 weeks later in the great granite hall, and it convened expecting a trial, because Lord Maddock had covered his tracks and filed his outrage, and the council had summoned the Borderland Omega to answer for the unclaimed royal blood in her house. Sarah walked the length of that hall in her grey shawl, with the blue darned moth hole, a twin on each hip, past silk and silver and 400 wolves who had decided what she was before she cleared the doors, and she kept her chin level the whole way, because she had hauled water through 2 winters, and there was nothing in this room heavier than that. Vesa rose to read the charge. She got 4 words into it. The Alpha King came down from the dais, not to his chair, past it, down the steps, across the stones, in front of the whole assembly, and took Rowan onto his own arm, and turned to face his kingdom, with his son's fist tangled in the chain of office at his throat. "There is no unclaimed blood in this hall," he said, and his voice reached the doors without effort. "This is Rowan, my son. This is Wren, my daughter. And this is Sarah Vane, who was cast out by fools, and who will wear my mother's brooch, which I have it on good authority, has been in her rafters since autumn." A ripple went through the hall, half gasp, half laughter. "She is mine. I am hers. She has agreed to nothing but a courtship on her terms, and I inform the council that her terms outrank yours. Kneel or leave." 400 wolves knelt. Sarah stood in the middle of them, in her darned shawl. Silk in the room, and found Vesa's eyes on her, old iron gone strange. Madoc was finished within the month. His hunter's testimony brought his exile to the Salt Coast, and it is recorded that at his sentencing he said only one thing in his own defense, that he had ordered the pups untouched, and that this was true. And the record notes that the king paused a long moment before pronouncing, and made the exile bearable, and no one but Torrin understood why. Vesa came to the dye house herself, before Sarah left it for good. She came alone, on foot, and she did not apologize. Iron does not bend that way. She put a parcel in Sarah's hands, brown paper, string tied in a heeler's knot, and inside was a blanket, lamb's wool, stitched over what must have been many nights, in the old border pattern that mothers of Vesa's generation made for their own. Pinned to one corner was a small carved rattle, thumb-sized, worn glass smooth, by 30 years of a hand in a sleeve. "For the loud one," Vesa said. Her voice was steady, her jaw was not. "Wren, she'll wear out lesser goods." And she turned and walked back down the mud road, with her spine perfectly straight, and Sarah stood in her doorway, holding the blanket, and understood exactly as much of it as Vesa could survive her understanding, which was everything, and neither of them ever said a word about it again. The courtship lasted through the spring, conducted scrupulously on 2 legs, and the mating mark, when Sarah finally allowed it under the next Vale-run moon, in the same birch grove, with no masks at all this time, is a story the ballads did get right, so it needs no retelling here. But this is how the record of that year actually ends, in the private wing of the granite fortress where the fires burn all night. It was late, and the Queen of Black Pine sat on the hearthstones, because she had never in her life learned to prefer chairs, her back against the flank of an enormous black wolf. Rowan was asleep in the curl of the wolf's foreleg. Wren was asleep on the wolf's back itself, sprawled like a conquest, one fist gripping his ear. On the wall above the mantel hung a grey shawl with a moth hole darned in blue, framed under glass by royal order, beside a silver brooch that Sarah still refused to wear on wash days. The wolf's great head lay in her lap. She worked her fingers into the fur behind his left ear and found what she was looking for. A burr, picked up in the pines like always, and eased it free the way she had 100 times, back when he was just the strangest stray she'd ever taken in. "Got it," she murmured. The tale of the Alpha King of the 11 packs of black pine rose, and thumped the hearthstones 4 times, and he did not even try to stop it.